He's just a waiter, my son-in-law sneered at the wedding guests, pointing at me like I was nothing. I stayed quiet until someone whispered, "Wait, isn't he on TV?" My son-in-law's glass slipped and shattered. That moment changed. Everything. The gift box in my hands carried more than weight, it carried legacy. Inside was my father's gold watch. Sophia's eyes lit up when she saw it, but Michael only scoffed. Vintage. Probably worth something to a collector. He didn't understand. This wasn't about money. This was about family. The chatter of laughter and clinking glasses filled the grand wedding hall. Crystal chandeliers bathed everything in golden light, reflecting off marble floors and designer gowns. I strolled among the tables, balancing a tray of champagne flutes. My hands trembled slightly, not from the weight, but from the strange emptiness pressing on my chest. I wasn't supposed to feel like a stranger at my own daughter's wedding. Sophia was radiant in her gown, moving gracefully among the guests, her laughter like a melody I had longed for my whole life. I wanted to be proud, to be at ease, but every time I glanced across the room, my eyes met Michael's, my son-in-law, his smirk sharp, his eyes full of disdain. It happened so suddenly. Michael raised his glass and called for attention. His voice boomed, confident and arrogant. "Ladies and gentlemen, do you know who this man is?" He pointed directly at me, his finger steady, his smile cruel. The hall grew quiet, dozens of faces turning toward me. My chest tightened. For a brief second, I thought, maybe, just maybe, he would introduce me with honor. But his words sliced through me like a blade. "He's just a waiter." A ripple of laughter and murmurs moved through the crowd. Some chuckled politely, others nodded, as if his declaration had confirmed my worth. I felt their eyes crawl over me, my pressed khakis, my old polo shirt, the best clothes I owned, suddenly reduced to a costume of shame. I lowered my gaze and forced my hand steady as I poured champagne into an empty glass. The bubbles fizzed violently, betraying the tremor in my grip. Michael leaned closer to the guests at his table and whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Imagine that. My father-in-law is serving drinks at his own daughter's wedding." How fitting. Laughter again. This time harsher. Each sound pierced me. I wanted to vanish into the walls, to become invisible, to not let Sophia see the redness burning in my eyes. I had lived my whole life swallowing pride for her sake. Tonight was no different. But then, a voice broke through the cruelty. "My God, he's on TV." The words came from an older man near the back, his eyes narrowing as recognition dawned on his face. Guests began to murmur, heads turning, curiosity sparking. Michael froze. His smirk faltered. The glass in his hand slipped. A sharp crack shattered the silence as it hit the floor, champagne splattering across the marble. His face drained of color. I stood there, tray in hand, heart pounding in my chest. For years, I had been invisible to these kinds of people. But in that one moment, everything shifted. The laughter stopped. The whispers changed. And Michael's contempt turned into something else, something almost like fear. The murmurs still echoed in the hall after Michael's glass shattered, but I forced myself to breathe steadily. I had not come here for recognition. I had come for Sophia, for her happiness, for family. And in my hands, I carried a box that felt far heavier than its size. The gift. As I walked toward my daughter, I could feel its weight pulling at me. Not just the wood and metal inside, but the decades of memory it carried. My father's watch. The last piece of him I had. Sophia saw me approach. Her face lit up with that same childlike brightness I remembered from when she was small, waiting at the window for me to come home from a double shift. She stepped away from her friends and hurried to me, her gown brushing against the floor. Like a wave of white silk. "Dad, you made it." She kissed my cheek, her perfume warm, familiar. Then her eyes dropped to the box in my hands. "What's that?" I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. "Grandfather's watch," I said. My voice was steadier than I thought. You might want it for the wedding. Her eyes widened, shimmering with emotion. Really? Dad, can I see it? But before I could answer, Michael appeared, his wine glass replaced by irritation. His steps were sharp, deliberate, as if he owned the air around him. He glanced at me the way one might at a stain on their carpet. James. His voice was flat, dismissive. His handshake earlier had been the same, brief, cold, like he'd been forced to touch something beneath him. Still working at that. Italian place? Yes, Bella Vista. I kept my voice even. His eyes flickered over my clothes, then down to the box. He sneered faintly. What's in the box? Sophia jumped in, bouncing on her toes like the little girl who once unwrapped Christmas gifts with trembling hands. Grandpa's watch, she said with excitement. I knelt slightly and unwrapped the box carefully, my fingers tracing the folds of the paper as though I were holding something sacred. Inside lay the gold pocket watch, gleaming faintly under the light. The chain curled neatly, and though time had left its marks, it radiated dignity, the kind of beauty money couldn't buy. Sophia gasped. Dad, it's beautiful. Her voice cracked, her eyes soft with emotion. She touched it gently, as though afraid it might break. Michael barely glanced at it. He sipped his drink, or pretended to, his jaw tight. Vintage, he muttered flatly. Probably worth something to a collector. His words stung. To him, everything was measured in price tags, in status. But this watch was not about money. It was about blood, memory, and sacrifice. As I held it in my palm, flashes of the past seared through my mind. My father, his rough hands placing it in mine, the night before he passed. I working late into the night, stare at it on the table for strength. Sophia, a little girl asleep at the kitchen counter, her homework spread around her, while I counted tips and coins to pay for her school books. Every tick of that watch had been a reminder that time was precious. And sacrifice was worth it. Michael couldn't see it. But Sophia did. Her fingers trembled as she fastened the watch to her wrist. She looked at me with tears forming in her eyes. Dad, she whispered, her voice breaking. This means more than anything. And in that moment, the weight of the gift wasn't just mine anymore. It was hers. The murmurs about me being on TV hadn't entirely died down. Guests still glanced my way with curious eyes, whispers chasing one another through the hall. Michael noticed. His jaw stiffened, his smile forced. He poured himself another drink, trying to look unbothered, but the tension in his hand betrayed him. I stayed silent. Let them wonder. The truth of who I had been wasn't something I flaunted. It was something life had stripped from me long ago. Sophia, still holding the watch close, looked up at me. Dad, why did someone say you were on TV? Her voice was innocent. Curious, but it pierced me. She had never really known. She was too young when it mattered. I drew in a breath, steadying myself. Because I was, I said quietly. Her brows furrowed. What do you mean? I looked past her, not at the glittering hall, but somewhere far away, in another life. I used to host a small program, I said slowly, the memories unfolding in my mind. Not a big one, not like the glamorous shows people see today. But it mattered to people. It was about stories, about ordinary lives. Every week, I sat down with someone, a farmer, a teacher, a baker, and we talked. Their struggles, their dreams. People watched, because it reminded them they weren't alone. Her lips parted. You never told me this. Michael let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. A community program? That's what this is about. You make it sound like you were a celebrity. I ignored him. The sting of his voice was nothing compared to the weight of memory pressing down on me. I gave it up, I said softly. When your mother got sick, the words tightened in my throat. Even after all these years, saying them out loud carried a pain that never dulled. She needed treatment. The hospital bills, they were endless. Insurance didn't cover half of it. I couldn't keep both the show and the extra work, so I walked away. I sold what little savings we had. I worked at restaurants, cleaned tables, and carried trays. Anything to keep her alive. I paused, my hand tightening over the watch in Sophia's palm. When she passed, you were all I had left, so I kept working. Every night, every morning. I skipped meals. I wore the same shoes until they tore apart. But you, I looked into Sophia's tear-brimmed eyes. You always had your school books, your uniforms. You always ate before I did. Sophia's lips trembled. Dad. But Michael cut in, his tone sharp, defensive. So what? You gave up a small-time show, worked in a restaurant, and now what? You think that makes you special? Everyone struggles. He sneered, lifting his glass. At least some of us rise above it. For the first time that night, I looked him square in the eye. I never needed to rise above it, I said calmly. I just needed to raise her. The room fell silent. A few guests lowered their eyes, uncomfortable with Michael's cruelty in the face of what I had confessed. But Michael stood rigid, his pride unwilling to bend, and in Sophia's trembling hands the watch ticked on, a reminder of the years I had lost, the sacrifices that had gone unseen, and the truth that no arrogance could erase. Dinner plates clattered, champagne poured, and laughter returned in patches. But the air around US had shifted. People still looked at me differently now, not just as the waiter, but as someone with a past they hadn't expected. Some even whispered with curiosity, leaning toward each other, recalling faint memories of seeing me on screen years ago. Michael noticed. And he hated it. I could see the tension in his jaw as he gripped Sophia's hand tighter than usual, his smile stretched too thin. He had built his life on status, on being the man at the top of the room. Tonight, for the first time, attention was being pulled away from him. He raised his voice suddenly, tapping his glass with a fork. The sharp chime drew everyone's eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his tone dripping with forced charm, "I think it's time we give another toast. But this one," he pointed at me, that cruel smirk returning, "is dedicated to the man of the hour." A murmur rippled through the guests. Michael lifted his glass high. "To James, my father-in-law. Or should I say—" He paused, letting the tension hang. "The most dedicated server of all. I mean, look at him. Still carrying trays, working tables, living in that little restaurant world. Who else would show up at a wedding dressed like that?" A few guests laughed uneasily, more out of discomfort than amusement. Others looked away, sensing the malice underneath his words. I felt my stomach twist. My hand clenched at my side, but I forced myself to breathe. I would not let him see me break. Michael wasn't finished. He leaned closer, his voice dropping. Lower, yet loud enough to be heard by the nearest tables. "A servant disguised as family. That's all he'll ever be." The words hit harder than the first insult. Not because of their cruelty. I had endured worse in life. But because Sophia stood right there, her hand trapped in his, her face pale with shock. "Michael," she hissed, her voice trembling. "That's enough." But before he could respond, a voice from across the room rang out, strong and clear. "Enough? He's the reason I ever believed in myself." All eyes turned. It was the same guest from earlier, the one who had recognized me. He stood now, his expression burning with conviction. "Do you people even realize who he is? Years ago, I was a struggling nobody. I saw him on that TV show, telling ordinary people's stories. He made me believe my story mattered, that I mattered. I wouldn't be standing here today without that." The room stilled. The man's words cut through the air like a blade of truth. Gasps, murmurs, shifting eyes. A few nodded, others whispered, memories resurfacing. Recognition spread across the room like a spark catching flame. Michael's face drained of color. His hand trembled around the glass, and in a moment of stunned disbelief, it slipped again. The crystal shattered against the marble, the sound louder, sharper than before. Champagne spread like a stain at his feet. He stood frozen, caught between anger and humiliation. For the first time that night, he had no words, and I stood silently, watching as the man who had tried to strip me of dignity was stripped of his own instead. The breaking point had arrived, and it wasn't mine. It was his. The clinking of glasses had gone quiet after Michael's humiliation. People still whispered, but now their eyes held curiosity, even respect, when they looked at me. Michael, however, barely held himself together, his jaw locked tight. As he guided Sophia away from the crowd, I stayed back, giving them space, though I could see the storm brewing in his face. It wasn't over. In the hallway just outside the reception, Michael finally let go of Sophia's hand, his voice low and sharp. "Do you see what's happening? Do you see how your father is dragging us down?" Sophia stared at him, disbelief etched on her face. "Dragging us down? Michael, do you even hear yourself? He's my father." Michael's lips curled in disdain. "Your waiter father. Do you know what people will say? That my wife's family comes from nothing, that I married into mediocrity. It's humiliating." Sophia's eyes shimmered with tears, but her voice hardened. "Humiliating? You think love, sacrifice, and loyalty are humiliating? Do you have any idea what he's done for me?" Michael scoffed. "He served drinks and gave you a second-hand watch. That's not sacrifice. That's pity disguised as sentiment." Her voice cracked, her anger mixing with heartbreak. "No, you don't know." She took a step closer, her words tumoring out like wounds reopening. "When Mom got sick, Dad worked 3 jobs, 3. He barely slept. He sold his car so I could keep going to school. He wore the same shoes until they split, and when I asked why he wasn't eating dinner, he said he wasn't hungry, but I found receipts showing he hadn't bought food for himself in weeks." "Weeks, Michael." Her voice rose, trembling, but steady in conviction. "Do you know who bought my books, my uniforms? Paid for every single lesson I ever took? Him, not you. Not your money, him. And you stand there and dare call him a servant?" Michael faltered, his face tightening, but pride kept him from backing down. "So what? He chose that life. He could have been more, done more. Don't blame me because he stayed small." The words burned like acid. I had followed them into the hallway quietly, unnoticed until now. And when I heard them, I felt something inside me break, not from his insult, but from realizing Sophia had to defend me against her own husband. Sophia turned sharply toward him, her eyes blazing. "No, Michael, you don't get it. He didn't stay small. He chose me, he chose us. And that's bigger than anything you'll ever understand." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael opened his mouth to reply, but no words came. His arrogance had carried him through every conversation, but not this one. Not against the truth Sophia had unleashed. I stepped forward, my voice calm, though it carried the weight of years. "I never wanted to be a burden," I said quietly. "I only wanted her to smile, to live the life her mother dreamed for her. That was enough for me." Sophia turned toward me, her tears falling freely now. She reached for my hand, squeezing it as though she feared I might disappear. And for the first time, Michael looked small, not me. The wedding stretched on with laughter and music in the background, but for me, the joy had already dimmed. I lingered on the edges of the celebration, watching Sophia dance with friends, her smile flickering in between stolen glances at Michael, whose pride still simmered under the surface. I told myself to endure. For her, always for her. Later that night, when most of the guests had gone and the lights of the hall had softened, I walked toward the coat room to collect my things. That's when I heard them. Michael's voice, low but sharp, cutting through the quiet like glass. "She's my wife now, Sophia. And we need to start thinking about ourselves, not about him. Not about his constant presence, his sad little stories, or his poverty dragging into our home. I froze in the hallway, my hand tightening around the box I carried. Sophia's voice trembled. "Michael, stop. He's my father." "And I'm your husband," Michael snapped. "We can't build our future with him hanging around, showing up, embarrassing us in front of everyone. Do you want people to remember your father as the waiter at his daughter's wedding? Because that's what they'll say. That's the legacy he's leaving you." My chest ached. Every word was a blade, not because of his cruelty. I had weathered worse, but because it was Sophia who stood in the middle, torn apart. Her voice cracked. "He's all I have left of Mom. He raised me. He gave up everything, Michael." Cut her off. Exactly. He gave up. That's who he is. And if you don't distance yourself from him, you'll always carry that with you. The silence that followed was unbearable. I could almost hear her heart breaking through the walls. I leaned against the cold plaster, my legs weak. For years, I had been willing to starve, to bend my back until it broke, just to protect her future. And now I realized, protecting her might mean stepping away. If my presence caused her pain, if it put her marriage at risk, then perhaps the greatest act of love left to me was to let her go. That night, before leaving, I sat at a quiet corner table with the gift box still beside me. I pulled out a sheet of paper from my pocket, an old envelope I had carried for weeks, intending to write, but never brave enough until now. My hands shook as I began. "My dearest Sophia, tonight, I gave you your grandfather's watch, but I also want to give you something else, the truth. Your mother and I dreamed of a life where you never had to see hunger, or fear, or shame. I couldn't give you riches, but I gave you everything I had, even the pieces of myself I never got back. Every hour I worked, every meal I skipped, every step I took, it was all for you. If I ever seemed absent, it was because I was fighting silently behind the curtain, making sure you shone on the stage. I heard what Michael said, and I don't want to be the reason for your battles. So I will step back, not because I don't love you, but because I love you more than life itself. Always remember, time is precious. And mine was worth spending on you. Love, Dad." I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside the gift box beside the watch chain. I kissed the lid, letting my lips rest there longer than I should have. Then I left it on the dresser in her room before walking away. When I stepped outside into the cold night, I didn't look back. My heart was heavy, but my resolve was clear. For the second time in my life, I chose sacrifice. And once again, it was for her. A week passed after the wedding. I didn't call Sophia, and she didn't call me. It wasn't anger that kept me away, it was fear. Fear that my presence might push her further into Michael's grip. Fear that she might choose him over me if forced. I busied myself at Bella Vista, waiting tables with a tired smile, carrying plates and glasses like nothing inside me was breaking. Nights were lonelier, but I told myself it was for the best. A father's love sometimes meant silence. Then one afternoon, as I was wiping down a table, Antonio, the restaurant owner, came rushing out of the office, his face flushed with excitement. "James," he shouted, waving his phone. "You're not going to believe this." I frowned, confused. "What is it?" He shoved the screen into my hands. On it was a news article, a headline in bold letters. "Forgotten TV host story goes viral. The man who gave a voice to ordinary people." My breath caught. There was a photo, me younger, sitting on that old TV set with a farmer by my side, smiling as if the world was still kind. Antonio grinned. It's everywhere. Social media, newspapers, and even TV. Someone found clips of your old program, and now everyone's talking about it. They're calling you the man who listened when no one else would. My knees went weak. I had spent so long believing those years had vanished, erased by struggle and time. And now, here they were again, alive, The very next day, Sophia came rushing into the restaurant. Her eyes were swollen, her hair a little undone, like she hadn't slept. She carried the gift box in her arms, holding it against her chest. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling. I froze, tray still in hand. "Sophia." She stepped closer, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you ever tell me who you were?" I set the tray down, my throat thick. "Because that wasn't who I was anymore. What mattered was being your father. The rest, it didn't matter." She shook her head fiercely. "It doesn't matter. The world sees you now, Dad. Do you know what people are saying? They're calling you an inspiration. They're saying your show gave dignity to those who never had it. And all this time, I thought you were just surviving. But you were carrying greatness, and you never told me." Her tears spilled as she held out the letter I had left behind. "And then I read this. You were going to leave me, weren't you?" My chest ached. I couldn't speak. She clutched the watch tightly in her hands. "You've given me everything, Dad. How could you think stepping away was love? You're not a burden. You're the reason I exist, the reason I smile, the reason I'm standing here today." I felt the weight of her words press into me, heavier than any tray I'd ever carried. For years, I had been invisible. And now, the world had seen me again, but more importantly, so had she. Behind her, I noticed a few customers in the restaurant staring, whispering, even pulling out phones. Recognition spread. Strangers smiled at me, some nodding, some even applauding quietly, but none of it mattered. The only recognition I needed was in my daughter's eyes. And in that moment, for the first time in decades, I felt seen. The recognition spread faster than I could have imagined. Within days, my name, once forgotten, was on people's lips again. Clips of my old show circulated online, me sitting across from a fisherman, or holding the hand of a widowed teacher as she told her story, or smiling at a child who dreamed of becoming a doctor. People praised the humanity in those moments, calling them timeless. But in Michael's world, that recognition was poisoned. Sophia told me later that he grew angrier by the day. His colleagues sent him articles, teasing him, saying, "So your father-in-law is the famous one, not you." His pride, built on status and appearances, crumbled. And then came the night he couldn't hold it in any longer. At a family dinner, with relatives gathered and conversation flowing, Michael finally snapped. He set down his fork with a loud clang, his voice sharp. "Are we all going to keep pretending this is normal? That the waiter is now some kind of hero because people found a few old videos?" The table fell silent. All eyes turned toward him. Sophia's face tightened. "Michael." But he pressed on, his arrogance pushing through the cracks in his pride. "This is ridiculous. Everyone is acting like he's some great man. Let's not forget, he spent years carrying trays. Years living in mediocrity. That's who he is. Not some legend, not some saint. Just a man who gave up on life and let the world pass him by." My chest tightened, but before I could respond, Sophia's voice cut through the silence, steady and firm. "Enough." The words struck harder than any shout. Michael turned to her, startled. Sophia's hands trembled, but her voice carried a strength I hadn't heard before. "You don't get to talk about my father that way. Not anymore. Not ever again." He blinked. "Sophia." "No," she interrupted, her tone unshakable. "You mocked him in front of guests. You humiliated him on my wedding day. You tried to convince me he was nothing, that I should distance myself from him. And now, when the world finally sees the man he truly is, you still try to tear him down." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't look away. "Do you know what he gave me? Everything. He gave me books when he had no money. He gave me food when he was starving. He gave me hope when the world was cruel. And you," her voice cracked, her anger breaking through, "you've given me nothing but shame." The words landed like a blow. Michael's face flushed, his mouth opening and closing as though searching for an argument. But none came. Sophia stood then, her chair scraping back. She moved to my side and slipped her arm through mine, her head held high. "If you can't respect my father," she said firmly, "then you don't respect me. And I will not choose between the two, because I chose him, always." The room was silent. Relatives stared, some nodding slowly, others whispering in awe. Michael sank back in his chair, small, diminished. The man who had once tried to make me invisible was now the one invisible to everyone else. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to defend myself. My daughter had done it for me. The silence at the table lingered long after Sophia's words. Michael sat hunched, staring into his untouched glass, while the rest of the family avoided his eyes. No one rushed to defend him. No one laughed at his old insults anymore. For years, I had been silent. I had endured humiliation, swallowed pride, and let others paint me as small. But tonight, after hearing my daughter stand for me with all the fire in her heart, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades, the right to speak. I placed my hand gently on Sophia's, steadying her trembling fingers. My voice came quietly, but clear enough for every soul in the room to hear. "I don't need recognition," I began, my gaze sweeping slowly across the faces around me. "I never did. I never needed applause, or wealth, or titles. All I ever wanted was simple, to see my daughter smile. To give her a life her mother and I dreamed of. That was enough." I turned to Sophia, my throat tightening. "Sophia, you were my reason to keep moving when I wanted to stop. You were my light when everything else went dark. And if I could go back and live it all again, every night without food, every hour of work, every insult I've swallowed, I would do it 1,000 times, just to see you happy." Her tears spilt freely, her hand gripping mine so tight it hurt. "Dad," she whispered, her voice breaking. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the gold watch, pressing it gently into her palm. This was never about money, or collectors, or value. This watch is a reminder that time is precious. My father gave it to me, and I spent my time on you. And I don't regret a second. Sophia cradled the watch against her chest, sobbing softly. She leaned into me, wrapping her arms around me in a way she hadn't done since she was a child. And in that embrace, I felt something heal inside me, a wound I had carried quietly for too long. Michael sat silently, shrinking in the corner of the room. For once, his voice held no power. His arrogance had crumbled, while the bond between father and daughter had only grown stronger. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting her warmth steady me. My daughter was no longer a child, but in my arms, she would always be the little girl who once clutched my hand as we crossed the street, trusting me to lead her safely. I opened my eyes and whispered, not just to her, but to everyone watching. I am not ashamed of who I am. I am not ashamed of what I've done. If my legacy is sacrifice, then I wear it proudly. Because sacrifice, when it's born of love, is the greatest wealth a man can leave behind. Sophia wept harder, holding me as though she would never let go again. And for the first time in years, I felt no burden, no shame, only peace. Watch ticked softly in her hands. Not just a timepiece anymore, but a symbol of love, of loss, of everything I had given and everything I had received in return. And in that moment, surrounded by silence, I knew the truth. I had not lived in vain.